sooner or later you get hungry, you get conditioned to a reaction. And a lot of marriages, their communication fails because they become conditioned to every time they talk. It ends up either A, in a fight, or B, it's just something that we've talked about, something that's so stressful, it makes you not want to have that conversation. What happens is every time that you have a conversation, it ends up it's one of those stressful conversations, or it's one of those mundane, got to do this, got to do that kind of conversations. Then you start to dread talking. And then that's when marriages begin to break down.
Hello and welcome to the Sittin In A Tree podcast, where we're helping you build a fun and fulfilling marriage, sharing our stories, and giving out advice to move your marriage forward. Now, here's today's show.
Hey guys, I'm John.
And I'm Shellen.
And this is Sittin In A Tree podcast, the podcast where we try to help you have a fun and fulfilling marriage. Be sure you like, subscribe, download, do all of those things. It helps us get our message out to more people. Also, we'd love for you to leave a comment or leave a review. Let us know if this is helping you and what you've got out of these. You can comment on any video that you want to or any podcast that you want to.
So today we're going to talk about positive communication. And it's really easy to get caught in the day-to-day, mundane, bills, kids, everyday life stuff, and even just kind of the negative stuff. And talk about positive communication, about dreams and goals and the positive stuff that we can talk about instead of just the other stuff.
Right.
So you really get beyond kind of this negative feeling of, oh, we got to talk again.
Right.
And really have those moments of like, we get to talk again. Like we get to have this time where we get to communicate with each other and spend time together talking and dreaming and communicating about positive things too, because it's really easy to get into this routine of, we got to talk about stuff, especially if you have someone that isn't kind of the communicator or doesn't love to always talk.
Right.
It can feel very draining or all-consuming if it always feels like it's about the hard stuff. It's always about the negative stuff. It's always about the what else is coming up kind of thing. And if you're not always including some of the positive and the good stuff,
right,
and let's dream together, let's talk about the positive stuff, then it can really feel that way. And so it's important to include those fun things.
Right. Yeah, I liked what you said there. Basically, what you're saying is the power of positive conversation is what takes your conversations from, oh, we have to have another conversation, to, wow, we get to have another conversation. And so that positive conversation is important because it doesn't relegate all of your talking into the serious or even the stressful conversations that we have. So it gets you into more of conversations that lead to deeper conversations instead of leading to all of the other stuff that the stressful things, lead to.
Right. And it kind of goes back to when we were talking about fun, playful stuff and laughing and having a good time.
Right.
But it carries it a little deeper into the communication side of it. And how do we add that to our conversations and communication, connecting in that way as well?
Realistically, what are some ways, maybe for those that have maybe just getting starting in their marriage or have been married for a long time? And I joke all the time. I say things like, well, we've been married for 30 years. We've already discussed everything, that there are no new conversations, but there really are. It's just a joke, but it is very easy to feel like we've covered everything at this point. If you've been married for a little while, you feel like you've covered most of everything. And so what are some ways that we can instigate those types of conversations, and what are some practical things we can do in our marriage and relationship to be sure that we're having those positive conversations?
I think it's making time, of course, and really saying, what haven't we talked about in a while? That is a positive conversation. And even if you've taken time to really say to each other, like, what are your dreams? Or, what's something kind of funny we've talked about, but when did we do that last? It's then taking time to do that again. Because what you'll find is you haven't done that in a while, typically.
Right.
You do get caught up in the day-to-day, like what bills do we have to pay? This doesn't apply for us necessarily anymore because we don't have kids at home or a kid at home, but like, what are the kids doing? What is our schedule for the week? Have you bought groceries? What's for dinner? All that kind of stuff. But it really is then saying, when did we do that? I mean, when did we talk about something fun or, those kind of things,
Right.
and really sitting down and doing that again.
Right.
But if you have done that, usually things have changed since then.
Mm-hmm.
And so what are your dreams? What do you want to do? And some of the things that you think you may even know about each other has changed.
Mm-hmm.
We have had times where at different couples events and stuff, they would have like the newlywed game or just the couples game. And we got up there and we were one of the couples that were picked, and they asked questions like, what kind of perfume do they wear, and what's their favorite, do they wear jewelry, or what's their favorite whatever. And we won several times. It wasn't because we were the newlyweds at that point. It was because we communicated and we knew each other. And I think sometimes people were surprised and sometimes people weren't.
Right.
But it was because we communicated about those things. And it wasn't just silly things like what perfume, because, okay, that's sitting out every day. And so by default, I would hope at some point you would have seen it.
Right.
It's about things deeper than that.
Right.
But those things sometimes change over time too. And so you can't even say, well, they asked the same questions. It's about communicating about that and knowing. And just because in this instance, it hasn't changed. My favorite color's always been green. And so I would hope you still know my favorite color's green.
Right.
It's other things that have changed over time. And it's having those discussions and talking about it.
And personally, I would be less likely to remember or see something that was just sitting out as it would be to know something about you. I would be more apt to know those things because we have, for the most part, had decent communication through. I mean, we've had our ups and downs, but throughout our marriage, we've always at least came back to that good communication. Not everybody is a conversationalist, though. Some people are more quiet than others. You, for instance, I mean, a very quiet personality, much more outgoing now than when we first got married, especially. There are things that you can use if you are stuck. You don't have something, you can't think of something to talk about or something like that. There are games, get the card games that are conversation starters, get stuff like that to just pull out a card and have a conversation, just have a conversation over those things to be sure that your conversations are positive in nature, or are the positive conversations and not just the stressful ones. One thing that I try to do, or that we try to do in our marriage, is to be sure that we have times when that is our only conversation. Because if you sandwich them, that positive one gets forgotten a lot of times. Sometimes when you talk, it just needs to be left with that one, not, hey, what are your dreams? Okay, well, we need $6,000 by the end of the week to pay our bills. You can't sandwich it that way because then now you've just stressed out all the other stuff.
Right.
It's not a precursor to having those harder conversations. But what it does is when you are able to leave on those good conversations and they're not attached to the other conversations that you have to have, the hard conversations you have to have in marriage when you're partners in life, there are those tough conversations, those stressful conversations that you have to have. So you can't totally leave those, but setting aside time that is just for that positive talk, it gets you to where you don't dread having conversations, right? We kind of mentioned that earlier, but when we were talking about doing this, I kind of talked about Pavlov's dog, like you ring a bell every time, sooner or later you get hungry, you get conditioned to a reaction. And a lot of marriages, their communication fails because they become conditioned to every time they talk, it ends up either A, in a fight, or B, it's just something that we've talked about, something that's so stressful that it makes you not want to have that conversation. Some people are really good at living in la land, that they can totally disconnect. I'm able to do that. I'm able to a lot of times disconnect from everything that's going because of my job and different things. I have to at times be able to just disconnect and move on and then come back to the stressful part of life.
Right.
So you build that ability to be able to do that, but some people aren't like that. And so if you don't have that type of a personality, what happens is every time that you have a conversation, it ends up it's one of those stressful conversations, or it's one of those mundane, got to do this, got to do that kind of conversations. Then you start to dread talking.
Right.
And when you're dreading talking, that's when you introduce miscommunication or breakdowns in communications, or just
avoidance
of conversations and just lack of it. And And then that's when marriages begin to break down.
Mm-hmm.
And so really you can safeguard your marriage by learning to have those positive conversations. It's a safeguard for your marriage.
Right. Also, with part of that is you kind of said it earlier when we were talking before this is read the room and know what. I mean, you may have planned on having an important conversation after work or on the weekend, and it was something that is important that you have, but maybe based on the day, based on where your partner's at with their mood and everything else, it isn't time to have that important conversation.
Right.
And you need to put it off for a little while. Now, it doesn't mean you stick your head in the sand and say, well, we're just never going to talk about it.
Right.
But maybe that isn't the time. And maybe it is the time that you're going to be more playful and fun and dream dreams or laugh or joke or whatever and not go into that serious conversation right then.
Right.
And go back to it later when it's a better time. And that's important to be aware of that. Sometimes you can do that intuitively just because you know each other well. Sometimes it is asking, and maybe it's even starting and realizing, okay, we have to back up and maybe it isn't about conversation. We have to change the whole plan. Let's just go get dinner and we'll come back to this later. We're tabling this for now. But it's figuring out what's best in that moment. And it may be asking to do that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes you have to do that. And it's important to do that.
Right. So it's a way to safeguard your marriage for sure. It's also a way that you can reconnect or grow deeper in your relationship too, depending on which direction those conversations go. Those conversations don't always have to be deep conversations. They can just be fun or funny conversations. But those kind of conversations are what lead to the deeper conversations. And so learning to have those times where your conversation is solely positive gives you the opportunity to deepen that relationship and grow stronger in how much you do know, not only about that person, just things you know about them, but to really know who they are as a person. You get to know someone much deeper through those kind of conversations. And so having that type of positive conversation is a way to build your relationship too, not just safeguard it, but to actually build it and make it stronger.
You connect on a different level beyond that surface, everyday, day-to-day kind of almost survival mode and connect beyond that in a more deep, intimate way.
Right.
I think it teaches, what happens is, yes, you can do that alone as a couple, but if you have kids around and things like that, it teaches them good communication and ways that you connect and ways to connect to other people too. And so they see something different that you don't always see in the world.
Yeah.
You are the best example of what a couple is and what healthy communication, emotion, and all of those things are for our kids.
Right.
And so they see that from you, and that's a huge part of that.
Yeah, we lose sight of that a lot of times on how we are modeling a relationship for our kids. We happen to be in a position as pastors that we have to be sure that our relationship is modeling what a good Christian relationship is, because there are people that look towards us for that. But even inside of our own family, our daughter's already grown and married, and so they have a relationship. We want to model to them what a good relationship is. But we have grandkids that stay with us now, and so we want to be able to model to our grandkids what a healthy marriage looks like, and so to be able to show them, there would be nothing greater, no greater compliment, I think, to me than when my grandsons get old enough to get married, have those type of relationships. That my hope would be that they would say, I want to have a marriage like Gipper and Gigi have.
Right.
That's what drives me to be able to work so hard at being sure that everything is good in that manner, because I know that every day I'm modeling the type of relationship, trying to model the type of relationship that I want my kids and grandkids to have, in the same way that you can bring about generational curses, you can bring about generational blessings, in that you have modeled the way to respond. We were playing baseball the other day.
I was just going to say that. Yeah.
Go ahead then.
So we were playing baseball with our grandson, Stetson. He's playing t-ball.
Mhm.
And we were outside playing Sunday afternoon. You were running bases because you had hit a home run again. And I was on third base, and you ran past third base and tagged base, and we're headed home and got home and stepped on home plate. And Stetson was standing there, and you said, "Don't tell anybody, but I have a crush on the third baseman." And Stetson said, "Everybody just heard you." and you said, "What?" And he said, "Everybody just heard you." And he's like, "Then it's not a secret." And you said, "It's okay." And he said,
Yeah.
"But then it's not a secret, Gipper." And so that was really cute that he got
Right.
to see that you still had a crush on me and, all those kind of things. And so that was a great example of that. And Stetson kept like looking at me and looking back at Gipper like, "You just said that out loud. Like,
Yeah.
this isn't a secret because you just said it out loud."
And he's 6. Girls are gross. So
Right.
he's
But
not there yet. But
at the
laying
same
the
time,
foundation.
he was smiling
Right.
and thinking it was cool that you had said it, but
Right.
also that you didn't have any situational awareness to realize you hadn't whispered it.
Right. And our daughter was saying, "Ooh, gross,"
Right.
and that kind of a thing. But even in that, it was still, we're modeling to them, even as you are not old by any means, but I have grown older, but there's still that I still do have a crush on you. I want people to know that, I want my grandkids to know that. I want my daughter and son-in-law to see that modeled before them, that this is not really just that it's possible, but that it is something that you can anticipate and that you can work towards and that you can have. I don't ever want that to fade. And so we keep doing that. And one of the ways that we do that is to have those type of conversations. And so those type of conversations, they safeguard your marriage so that the tough conversations don't hit as hard. And they also, strengthen what you have. They also, I think, give you hope for a future and remind you why you're doing this in the first place. A lot of people are able to check out of their relationships because the communication has broke down and they don't really remember why they're putting up with all this junk anyway. Like it would be easier to be on my own. Then I don't have anybody to answer to. I don't have anybody else to take care of. I don't have to keep you from getting to that point. It helps you remember, the reasons that you love that person to begin with.
And that was a great example of positive communication in general, both with me and then with the whole family.
Right.
And it carried it beyond that.
Right.
So
Right.
that was an awesome example.
Yeah. And we're going to do more of those in the future. We've decided that one of aspects to our show, maybe starting next week, we're going to start doing story times where we just tell just stories from our own marriage, and they may or may not always relate to what we're talking about that day. They may be funny, they may be sad. I don't know. We'll just share stories from our own life, but we want to give you kind of a window into what our marriage looks like. Not that we have the perfect marriage. But I would classify it on the good side of things. If there's a spectrum, I think we're on the good side of the spectrum. So it gives us, just a way to give you kind of an insight into where we're coming from and why we say the things that we say. All of the things that we talk about are all of the things that we go through on a daily basis, the things that we try to practice, the things that we learn about, all of that stuff. We're still learning about relationships, and we still try things, and we still try to do new things and try new ways to be sure that we are growing closer. And one of the ways that we do that is through positive communication.
Absolutely. He's John.
She's Shallon. And this was Sittin In A Tree podcast. Thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.